If you'd like to learn how to create a stormy sky in watercolor in just a few minutes, watch this video. For today's video demonstration, I'm going to be using mostly a 2-inch Hake brush. It's spelled H-A-K-E. It sounds like the sport hockey. These guys are really inexpensive. They hold a lot of paint, a lot of water. Hairs do fall out quite a bit, but that's okay. Those flick off later. I'm also going to be using several Squirrel mop brushes. And these are the Harmony Squirrel number 2 brush and the Harmony Squirrel number 6 brush, and I will include a link to these in the video description if you're interested in purchasing these guys online. That's mainly what I'll be using. Then eventually I'll switch to some smaller brushes, and those will probably be my Richeson Silver Velvet number 6 round brush, and then Richeson number 8 Silver Velvet round brush. So I have my paper elevated, and now it's time to start painting. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mixing up a bunch of dark blues using Ultramarine blue and just kind of some whatever I have left on my palette here. So I'm not exactly sure what some of these colors down here on the palette are, but they're just, I want something darker. Get a big puddle of color going, because the thing is, if you're trying to mix all this color up and the paper's drying on you, you're going to be playing catch up the whole time. You don't want to be doing that. So grab a bunch of color, a lot of water, and you want to get a big bead of water and color that comes and sits across here. If you got that big bead of water and color that sits across the whole surface, it gives you a long time to play around and change your colors, and you're not going to get hard edges because this is all still wet. It's not drying on you. I'm going to come down here, and that's why these Hake brushes are nice, because they do hold a lot of paint, a lot of water. Grabbing some Imperial Purple by Daniel Smith. I'm going to put that at the top. And because this is all wet, we're not going to get hard edges on this yet. Now make sure the paint was emulsified, so it's not just straight paint you're putting down. Rinse the brush off a little bit. Then I want to switch to yellow ochre. So I'll make sure the brush is clean. And with the yellow ochre, oh, that's not yellow ochre. It says that was yellow ochre in my palette, but I don't think that is. I think I put something else in there by accident. Well, we're going to go with that instead. And then come up here and then let these guys touch and kiss. Now go back and forth a couple times. It will start to make a little bit of a green color, but it's not going to overload it with green. I come up here and drop in some more color if I want to. I'm splattering paint while things are still wet. If I want to go back up in here and to drop some more purple into here, I still could. You have lots of time to go back into things while things are wet. But if you go back into things that are dry, that's when it gets really nasty for you. Grabbing some more blue. This is Cobalt blue. Some Ultramarine blue. Making sure it's not just straight paint. Bring it into here. And rinse that brush off again. Bring this downhill here. Trying to not get streaks in the sky. And I know that's easier said than done. So I'm just trying to keep this even across the whole thing. You can go back and forth a couple times. And things are still wet. Remember, you got lots of time to go back into it. So I can come up here and I can drop even darker purple into here. Just looking for this nice graduated wash. Then as things get to the bottom here, I'm going to switch back to my blue color, Cobalt, Ultramarine blue. Drop it down here first and then come back up and let these guys touch and kiss. Now I had some straight paint that came from somewhere. So just emulsify and get it mixed up. Watch out for the edges too underneath the paper, because wherever the paper is wet, you're going to get water blossoms in about 10 minutes. And you're not really going to see it till it's probably too late. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking a piece of my Viva paper towels, and I'm just going to soak up the excess water that went underneath here. All right, and once I get a nice wash that I'm happy with, I got a little bit of some extra color on the side here that ran down here. So I'm going to take my thirsty brush. Brush is drier than the paper. Just wick a little bit of that up. That's not really too much of an issue though. That's going to even itself out. So once I'm happy with this graduated wash, And the next step is to take what I've got this angled on, the 2-inch tape, and take that out of here. You're going to have to go underneath here again probably one point in time and do another cleanup on all 4, because more water's crept underneath there. You could put tape around the edges, but then you lose another 1/2 inch on each side of the paper, which I don't like to do. I just like to paint right to the edge of the paper. Paper is going to unfurl itself and get flattened later, as long as you don't have giant puddles. When you paint at an angle, you're not going to get as big of puddles because gravity moves everything for you. So it also helps to prevent water blossoms. If you think you're going to get a big water blossom, which I might down here at the bottom, I can see this looks wetter than the rest of the paper. Just going to soak that up a little bit with a thirsty brush. The brush is drier than the paper, and then dab it off on your paper towel. And now I'm going to set this flat, and I'm going to come into here with a squirrel mop brush, and I'm going to mix up some blue paint, Cobalt, Ultramarine. Yeah, looks like I'm getting kind of low with Ultramarine on my palette here. And I'll take a little bit of that Imperial purple also, and thicker paint, a little bit less water. And I'll come into here, and this looks way too dark to start with. And that's one of the hard things with watercolor, because it looks like it's way too much. In 10 minutes, it's going to look completely different. 2 minutes, it's going to look completely different. Heck, I'm lying. 5 minutes later, it's going to look completely different. So now I come into here, some thicker paint, less water. Drop that in there. You could rinse off the brush a little bit. Let's switch to some Cerulean blue, which is kind of a blue-green. And I'll come in here, and so this is a little bit lighter. It's not going to be as dark. What this is going to do is this is going to start to sit on top of the surface and make it look like it's coming forward. Let's just cover that up in there too, get rid of that. And then one thing I had not planned on doing was doing some lifting right now, but I could do that. Let me shit. Okay, while my paint is still wet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here with, now I'm going to use a 1/2 inch flat brush, which everything's rubbed off on this handle, but this is also Richeson 1/2 inch flat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to start taking off some of the, wicking up some of the color. So what I'm doing now is the paper, the brush is wet, but what I'm doing is I'm reactivating the paint a little bit, and then I'm pulling it off with a paper towel. And you can, while it's still wet, you can, any color you can get back to almost the pure white of the paper. Once it dries, it's a little bit more difficult. See, this is starting to dry up in here, so I'm starting to get a hard edge. And clouds, you're going to find, if you look at clouds, you know, they don't all have completely soft edges. They do have some harder edges in certain places. Not completely hard, but the more you analyze clouds, the more you just analyze anything, you'll start to realize how to paint things, because if you start to look at edge quality, there's some hard edges, there's some softer edges. Clouds do have dimensions also. Depending on where the light source is, even on cloudy days, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow someplace. If that edge is too hard, I could come up in here and I could wick up, take off some of that color. I'm getting a little bit of a hard edge there. I don't mind that though. Let's take out some of this stuff. Wicking this up, activating a little bit of the color, then pulling it off with the paper towel. You do want to have semi-clean water when you do this. You don't want to have filthy water. And you could do all kinds of just different, you could even drop in some water blossoms. So water blossoms are what happens when you put more water on top of something that's already wet. What that's going to do is, I'm going to switch to my squirrel mop round for that. When you drop in more water, what that's going to do is it's going to push the pigment that's wet aside, and it starts to create a cauliflower blossoming effect, whatever you want to call it. But it takes a few minutes, so it's one of those things where you just can't do too much at once. If you play with it too much, it bites you. It's like that the snakes I find on the Greenway Trail here in Raleigh. And in North Carolina, that's a little dangerous. Now the paper is dry down here. If I look at this, I don't see anything that doesn't look shiny or wet. So dropping water into here really isn't going to do much at this point in time. See this effect starting to kick in? If you want to get finer details, smaller shapes, grab a smaller brush. Remember, we're just dropping the water on top and letting it blossom and do its thing. You try not to go back and forth over it too much. Just drop and let it do. Now what's going to happen is you're usually going to do this by accident. You're not going to notice it until 10 minutes later, which is sometimes unfortunate. I'm doing a little bit more lifting now. But yeah, with blossoms, the idea is to drop it down and let the water push the pigment aside. You don't want to use a hairdryer, because if you do use a hairdryer, you're going to start blowing paint all over the place. I could put a big blossom. This is still partially wet in here. I could drop a blossom into there. This paper is getting a little bit too dry on me right now. I can't do anything right there. So I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to let this sit and just do a time lapse for a couple minutes and let it get its effect. Then finish with the hairdryer, and then we're going to go on to the second layer. All right, now I did lie to you guys. I hadn't planned on it, but this was really too wet. So I used a hairdryer on a little bit, and it did kind of blow things around and give me a hard edge. I just didn't feel like waiting for this stuff to dry, but that's actually okay because it's clouds. You know, I can go back into here now with a wet brush and reactivate this color a little bit, and then dab off the paper towel or soak it up with a thirsty brush. So if you get a hard edge where you don't want it, it's pretty easy to correct this stuff later. And they're clouds, you know, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, no one's going to know that I made that little mistake except for everybody who watches this video. But now I pretty much just got rid of that right there. And you know, this dark area here I'm going to cover in just a few minutes too. I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so now for the next stage of this, you want to make sure that the paper is 1000% dry, not just 100% dry, because if it's not completely dry when you go over this with more water, and you're going to pull off all this other color. So use the back of your hand, and if the paper feels kind of cold to the touch, it's probably still a little bit wet, hit it with the hairdryer until it doesn't feel cold to the touch. And then what I want you to do is come into here with your Hake brush again, or a very soft squirrel mop brush, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over it with water. Doing this flat now, because I don't want gravity to move things like I did last time. Trying to keep the water even and trying not to go back and forth too much over things. The water looks like it's starting to puddle in a bunch of different areas. Tilt it up for a couple seconds, let it even itself up. And you're going to find when you do this, not a whole lot of color comes off the paper, and that's what you want. And now I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my squirrel mop brush. I'm going to tilt this up just a little bit more here. I'm going to pick up the excess water that's dripping off the paper right now. And you can see a little bit of that yellow streaking, but it's not too bad. All right, that's a little bit evener now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here with, I'll go back to my purple mixture and my blue mixture. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get thicker paint, less water in here. I got to tilt that up one more time because I've got some more other big puddles just sitting there. We'll do cleanup on all four with a paper towel. Just trying to get that water even across the whole paper without lifting off all the color. That looks better. So thicker paint, less water. I mean, you can see on the palette that it's not super watery there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come into here with this thicker paint, less water, and drop it on. And it's going to look really dark to start with, but we know from experience it's not going to be. It's going to lighten up a little bit. It's still going to give you soft edges though, and it's going to read as coming forward in front of those other clouds that we just worked on. So if you messed up some sections before in certain areas, this is your chance to fix that. Take your colors, and you can come into here, and just drop down some different cloud shapes. You will get soft edges. The thicker the paint, the less it's going to move. And that takes a while to kind of figure that out. And you can control this as the paper starts drying you. So what I'm just trying to do is just create a sense of movement in this piece right now. So over here the paper is getting drier, it's not going to move as much. So I can go back and forth between some things. Down in this area, I want to make some darker clouds too. I'm going to switch to Rose of Ultramarine and the yellow. Kind of make a darker orange color. I've got a big puddle of water sitting right here. I'm going to avoid that right now. And I actually think I might switch to a smaller brush here. So I'm going to put down some different orange clouds in this section. Maybe bring them a little bit up in here too so they relate to each other. And I'm going to sit down here and keep working on this a little bit. If it's too much, take your brush, wick it up. It's going to start to dry the paper where you wick up the color in the water. So it's another way to kind of control the shapes. You can, using a thirsty brush, you're pulling the color off at this point in time. So you'll start to get hard edges in certain places. You'll get soft edges where things are still wet. Where you take off the water, you're going to start to get hard edges there. Because now that area of the paper is going to start to dry on you quicker. And now I'm coming into here with even thicker paint, less water. Ultramarine, burnt sienna. I'll keep it more blue color. And I'm going to drop some really dark colors into this. This is really thick paint at this point in time. So you're going to find at this point in time the color is not moving. Hardly at all. It's just going to sit on top. You're still going to get not complete hard edges because the paper is still partially damp. And it is going to look different in 5 minutes. So what it looks like right now, you just have to remember that it's not going to look this way a little bit later. I'm going to come into here if this orange starts to spread out too much, soak it up with a thirsty brush. You should use clean water and a clean paper towel. Cleanish. Come in here and soak that up a little bit. So this is just a way of controlling edges as paint dries. And this is another reason why you do want to use good paper too, because if you're using cheap paper, color soaks into things too quickly. You can't do much with it. That's one thing I'm always telling my students, like spend money on the paper, especially when you're starting out. You don't have to have expensive paints. You can paint with old cheap paints, burnt sienna, yellow ochre. You don't have to have the best paints in the world or the best brushes in the world, but if you have bad paper, I think you're just going to be really frustrated. You're shooting yourself in the foot from the very beginning. I can come in here and start lifting out some things, which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm pulling out some shapes, trying to make things look a little more three-dimensional if I lose the cloud shapes that I'm looking for. Thirsty brushing it and pulling color off. And I'm just taking a look at how things look. And what's going on right now is I'm not really pulling off the yellow too much. I'm just pulling off the orange because that was the last layer I just added. The yellow's dried on the paper for the most part. Take out some of that. You could drop in some water blossoms. It isn't going to do much except for where you just put color down here. Of course, if you do this too, go back and forth, it really aggravates things. So I could come into here and I could start lifting out some of the purple I just put down a few minutes ago. This is kind of hard on brushes, so this will kill your tips pretty quickly. Dropping down some blossoms into the purple and blue that I put. Put some blossoms into the orange. The orange I use is Perinone orange. It's a pretty strong one. It does stain the paper pretty quickly. So if you're trying to pull it out later, good luck. It's the Daniel Smith Perinone orange. Bring this out here a little bit longer. And I think we're starting to get kind of a nice cloud shape. You just can't do too much with it. See that beautiful blossom effect that's happening right there? We're getting some hard edges here. If you want to knock them back a little bit, you can. Just hit with some water. Get rid of the excess water on a paper towel. If you're going to dab, make sure the paper towel's kind of clean. I'm not really good at that. I have a tendency to start dabbing into things when with dirty paper towels, and you scrub the color into it. Okay. I'm going to stand up and see how this looks. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to let that dry, so I'm going to give that a couple minutes and dry that. All right, everything is 1000% dry. I can touch it. It doesn't feel cold to the touch. I'm going to the next layer, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start putting a little bit of some background shapes into here. Background landscapes. So I'm going to take some of the purple. I'm going to take some of this yellow, which I don't know what the heck this yellow is. A little bit of blue. We're going to make a gray color. And I will go back and forth between making it warm and cool. I'm just a little bit of burnt sienna. So we're mixing all the colors together, basically. I'm going to make this a little bit more blue than anything. And I'm going to start up in here. And this, again, is going to look super, super dark. And I put the tape back underneath the paper because I want this to go downhill. I'm always going to be changing that color temperature up a little bit, make it a little bit bluer. If you do that, it just makes it look so much more interesting. Using my Squirrel mop brush, the number 2, big enough. I will grab my Richeson brush, my number 8 round. And where I want to come up here and get a little bit more detailing at the top. And don't try to cover too much at once, because if you do, by the time you get back to the other areas, things are going to be drying on you. So I'm trying to make these look like background trees. So I want some harder edges. I'm just looking for a variety of shapes here. And I'm trying not to create patterns too much. I could take some more purple, throw it into my mix here. So it's more of a purple gray. Drop a little bit that into there. Changing the color temperature is really important in painting because it makes things just so much more interesting. If you just do a solid gray wash across this whole surface, I mean, it might be okay. I'm not saying you're not going to get a decent painting, but it's probably going to be kind of boring. So the beauty for me of watercolor is that you can do lots of different colors. Let's bring that down here. Make this go downhill a little bit, and then grab a bunch of that color. I'm going to grab some more of this yellow that's not yellow ochre. I have no idea what it is. Looks like new gamboge. I'm not sure why I put it in that well. That's usually where my yellow ochre sits. And go back to some blue here. The blue and the yellow are going to make a green color. So I'm just going to kind of overpower that. Careful with Squirrel mop brushes, they can fling paint everywhere. And gravity, of course, is going to take things downhill. Be careful, you could do a little bit of spattering here. Get some more like tree marks, tree shapes. But I'm just not trying to create too many patterns. Now, while this is all still really nice and juicy and wet, I'll come back into here and do a little bit of some, more detail. So we've got some different branches sticking up here. Everything's going to go downhill, of course, because it's all tilted. You could switch to even smaller brushes if you wanted to while this is all still wet. And while it's still wet too, rinse the brush off completely, and you could come back into here and just hit it with water. And what that's going to do is it's going to soften up that edge a little bit. And all that is going to go downhill. So you're going to get some harder edges, some softer edges. The more you go back and forth and agitate it a little bit, the more that's going to happen. You see how we're getting some softer edges here? If the color creeps up a little bit too much into the foreground, use the thirsty brush, just wick it up. But you can knock these edges back. So it's just about creating a sense of movement. And then all the water, of course, you can see is sitting right here. Oh, it's going to turn into a water blossom eventually, which I don't know if I want that. I'm going to dab off the little dots. I'll go back and do a little bit of some detailing up in here. Make it look more like maybe pine trees or something. While this is still wet, hit this with water, bring it down. Softer edge. Softer edge. If it creeps uphill on you again, just come back in and wick it up with a thirsty brush. So I'm constantly getting the brush warmer and drier or wetter, depending on what I'm looking for. Clean up on all four. Right now with these guys, what I could do is I could just wick this up with a thirsty brush, the big puddles, or let it just go off the edge of the paper. And lay that down again. I don't want to lay this flat. Clean up on all four because all that water is going underneath. And then I'm going to let that dry here. And I'll give that a few minutes. You can see down here, everything's dry now. I flipped a little bit of water in here just to create a little bit of texture. And then I did a mark on my paper for the rule of thirds. So I split the paper evenly into thirds to get my focal point, and I'm going to have the focal point be down here. I'm going to come into here, and now I'm going to be using my number 6 Richeson Silver Velvet brush, and also a rigger, which doesn't have a number or anything on it because everything's rubbed off on the handle. So I'm using really thick paint at this point in time. Pretty strong paint too, so I'm taking some purple, some red, just kind of a mixture of everything just to get some darks, some of the blue. I mean, a little bit of the yellow is going to gray everything down, so this is just going to make a nice dark color. And I'm going to start making a little tree, and I don't want this tree to be perfect, so it's going to be leaning over a little bit. Most trees are, if you look at them, they're not all perfectly straight up and down. And when you're doing branches, just try not to create patterns too much. Things aren't symmetrical. So miss a couple spots where the light's coming through. Try to get some different edge shapes so it's not all the exact same. I'm going to change that color temperature up again, just like I always do. I'm going to make my trunk come down to here. So this tree's got a little bit of a tilt to him. Him, her. Not trying to discriminate against the trees. And so I haven't used that rigger brush yet. I've just been using the number 6, which works pretty well. I might actually need a little bit of a bigger brush. So lots of water, lots of color. Missing some spots where the light's coming through. I'll grab some ultramarine blue now. Just make the color temperature a little bit different. It's much easier to miss spots and then go back later and cover them if it's too much, but if you don't do enough, it's kind of hard to catch up. It's hard to take the color off later. Changing it up again, grabbing some more blue, just so it looks a little bit different. Getting rid of some of the white spots, making this tree come out a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my squirrel mop brush, and I'm getting down to the bottom of where this tree is, and I want to kind of hide some edges. I don't want this to all be hard edged because I feel like this is just going to stand out too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to hit some darker areas in here. Put some color down there, and then I'm going to come back with just water, mostly clean just water, and let this touch and kiss, and this is going to feather the edges. So you're going to get some disappearing edges. The color will creep up into the paper a little bit. It doesn't make it look like it's so isolated from that last layer that we just did. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of sit here, wicking this up a little bit. I'm going to knock that back a little bit. So just dropping some water into there. So now we've got this tree that comes forward. And got to kind of monitor. I've got a big puddle right there. That's going to form a water blossom eventually. I'm just going to look at this and take a look here. All right, what I'm doing now is I'm using something called the Incredible Nib. And this is made from masking fluid, but I think it's pretty useless for masking fluid. Instead, what I use it for is to get rid of edges. This is it's a resin of some sort. And I know that because I emailed the company and asked them what it was. I was writing an article. And yeah, so it's just a composite. I'm going to let this puddle go downhill here just a little bit. so I can soak this up. Also, tilting it back this direction again is going to make everything go that way, so we're not going to get hard edges up above here. If you want to keep those edges soft, hit it with water again. Trying not to disturb the color that's underneath it very much. So don't go back and forth, because that's what does that. Now, if you want to get back to some lighter areas up in here, you want to make it look a little more three-dimensional, it's pretty easy to do with the nib. You just get the nib a little bit wet. You come into here, and this basically just wakes the kids up. Pulls color off the paper, take a cleanish paper towel, and dab into here, and you can start recovering some highlights. And because this is much harder than a brush, it gives you a different edge quality. And I use these guys all the time, but never for masking fluid. They're designed to put masking fluid on the paper, which in theory sounds great, but it doesn't hold anything because it's not a brush. But what I like it better for is just lifting off of color. So the more you agitate it, the more the color is going to come off. Clean paper towel. And you can see, you can really start to make this look three-dimensional. Now if I want to come in here and pull back some highlights from whatever yellow I use, which I don't know what that is. I got to get that off my palette. I don't know when I put that down there. That's kind of a surprise. I don't remember doing that. I could pull back some shapes. I could, if I lift out some highlights in here, it'll look like it's going behind that dark cloud. And the more you scrub, the more color is going to come off. So try not to do too much. See how that looks like it's going back behind there. This is also a great tool too, because if you keep the paper flat, you can pull color off very slowly and soften edges, and it doesn't pull the color off the paper. Unless you use a paper towel. And that's what literally lifts the color off the paper. So it looks like there's going to be a watermark right in here where this is drying. If I'm concerned about that, I could come in with just a little bit of water and touch that and let that touch and kiss. That probably is going to disappear though once the paint dries. Same thing over here. I could just come in here, just a little bit of water. And I'm going to I'll let this color creep a little bit more that way. That puddle was getting back into there a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with even thicker paint, less water, purple, brown, real thick paint. Drop into a couple parts of the tree, maybe down here. Let's make some dark darks right here also. I could come back into this area while it's still wet. So we're working wet and wet right now, so you're not going to get hard edges. And we're going to have some hard edges up in here because this is wet on dry. This is wet and wet, so we're going to have soft edges here. If you wanted to make more things pop up above here, you could put this into here. You could put a couple extra trees into this, and that'll make that come forward a little bit more. But I think I kind of like having this one tree. And I'm not using any sort of a photo reference. So if it makes you feel better, you get photo references from the internet. Don't be afraid to look at things when you're doing it. I'm just making this up. So I could put some darker shapes into here. It's going to be softer edge because it's where the paper's wet. But I'll make that come forward a little bit. Now that I did that, let's just go into here and just do a little something here. And I think I'm going to let that dry and evaluate and see if I like it, if it's enough. You also, if you want to scratch back to the lighter part of the paper, you can take a palette knife, and while everything is still wet, you should do this flat. Let's take that piece of tape out, the roll of tape underneath the paper out, and the idea is you're just parting the Red Seas. So it's a great way to get some additional texture into paintings without actually painting the detail. A little goes a long way though, so try not to do too much. If I think it's too much, I'll go back in with a brush and paint I could cover up some sections. I could do some other marks in there if I want, but I think I'm going to call that. I think I'm finished with this. I'm going to dry that and see how I feel. I'm going to clean up on all four one last time, and I think we are done with this painting. If you like this content, hit subscribe. I'll have more watercolor tutorials in the future. Thanks a lot and happy painting.